Welcome to the final session of this year's basic series on the Fruit of the Second Vatican Council. We've started way back in September or October, and gone through all 16 of the documents. Tonight we're going to finish with the last 3 documents. They're fairly short documents. The title of this was having to do with our relationship with non-Christians. And the 3 documents, one's on religious freedom, which is important for our interactions with those who aren't Christian. And then there's one specifically on non-Christian religions. And then the third one sort of relates to how we communicate with the world. It's on means of social communication. So those will be the 3 documents we'll get into, but we'll begin, as always, with our Lectio Divina, praying through the Scriptures by invoking the Holy Spirit, then reading the passage, meditating on it, reacting to what it is that seemed to come out to us, what God is speaking to us. Then respond to Him in prayer, to what He has spoken, and then spending some just time, quiet contemplation, allowing Him to speak to us, and then ending with praise. So, let us begin. In the Father, the Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Come, Holy Spirit, fill our hearts with your grace, your divine love. Help us to be open to hearing and listening to your word. Help us to grow deeper in love and knowledge of you and your Son. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John. Jesus said to his disciples, "Whoever loves me will keep my word, and my Father will love him, and we will come to him and make our dwelling with him. Whoever does not love me does not keep my words. Yet the word you hear is not mine, but that of the Father who sent me. I have told you this while I am with you. The Advocate, the Holy Spirit, whom the Father will send in my name, will teach you everything and remind you of all that I told you. Peace I leave with you, my peace I give you. Not as the world gives do I give it to you. Do not let your hearts be troubled or afraid. You heard me tell you, I am going away, and I will come back to you. If you loved me, you would rejoice that I am going to the Father, for the Father is greater than I. And now I have told you this before it happens, so that when it happens, you may believe." The Gospel of the Lord. We spent some moment reflecting, thinking about what is it that God was maybe trying to tell us through this passage, what might have jumped out through it. Came to my mind was the gifts that Jesus desires for his disciples, for the whole world, that he's giving to them in his last moments before his suffering and death. He promises them his peace. He promises that he and his Father will dwell with us. He promises to send the Holy Spirit to guide us. We spend some moments responding to the way in which God has spoken to us through this scripture passage. Then just spend a moment just listening, allowing him to speak. finish our brief time of prayer with some praise using the psalm from this coming Sunday. And as usual, we'll do the refrains together, and I'll do the verses. O God, let all the nations praise you.
O God, let all the nations praise you.
May God have pity on us and bless us. May he let his face shine upon us. So may your ways be known upon earth, among all nations your salvation.
O God, let all the nations praise you.
May the nations be glad and exult, because you rule the peoples in equity. The nations on earth you guide.
O God, let all the nations praise you.
May the peoples praise you, O God. May all the peoples praise you. May God bless you, and may all the ends of the earth fear him.
O God, let all the nations praise you.
All right. It's good to start with some moments of silence there at the beginning. That will come back way at the end of our presentation. We talk about social media, and there's a role of silence within that. So, as we always do, the brief review of our principles of how to interpret the Second Vatican Council and its documents. Once again, the hermeneutic, or the interpretive method that sees the Council as bringing something new that wasn't there before, so that the innovations are the things that is important, compared with the way that John the 23rd, Pope John Paul II, Pope Benedict XVI interpret it, through the hermeneutic of reform, in continuity with the things that had gone before. So we read these documents that are before us in light of everything that the Church has already said about those topics, so that we have a proper understanding of really what they're trying to teach us. So, summary of those principles. So the spirit of the Second Vatican Council is found in the documents themselves. That's why we've spent such great amount of time going through the documents themselves. And they're not in innovations that may not have anything to do with what are in the documents themselves. The documents, again, are teaching of the magisterium, so they're official teachings of the Church that requires our consent to them. They're infallible when it has to do with faith and morals. Even though they were written through human beings, but they are the teachings of the Church because they're guided by the Holy Spirit. So, and the purpose was not to change any doctrines, but to present them in a way in which fits with our state that we are in the modern world. And even though it was 50 years ago, many of the things are very aptly apply to what's going on. Then the final principle is the already but not yet. So some of the things that we see that have not yet been incorporated into the life of the Church there's a tension there between our desire to see things look the way the Church's view is, but to know that we're still yet living in an imperfect society. All right, so the first document that we're going to be talking about is Dignitatis Humanae. It's the document on religious freedom. And Dignitatis Humanae is Latin for human dignity. And so the concept of religious freedom we're going to find is going to be grounded in human dignity. Some of our other sessions that we already talked about at great length about human dignity, especially the ones when we discussed the Church and the modern world. So that's a basis of dialogue between us and the modern world. So this is goes into the specific area of what religious freedom is about. So the document begins by saying that the reason for this document is there's an increasing demand that we as human beings use our freedom responsibly, and especially to be able to exercise religion freely. And I'm going to show a video clip that kind of shows what's going on historically that kind of leads to the need for the Church to look back through its sacred tradition and its doctrine and to bring something new to apply it to the current situation that it finds itself in today. So I think that will become clear when we watch this.
The discussion about religious liberty as the consequence of the document of Dignitatis Humanae of the Council, I think it is true to make the difference between the understanding of religious liberty in the 19th century and of this atheistic movement from the French Revolution, to make Catholic countries like France or Italy and so on not Catholic. And therefore the popes wanted to reject this form of religious liberty. The religious liberty in the 20th century, in the former Soviet Union, was another situation, because the society, all society was not Catholic and was even, I would say, atheistic, without God. And worse, religion itself was prohibited. And in this context, we have to understand the religious liberty from the point of view of how I can argue with a government who is atheistic or who is not believes in God. So I have to argue with them on the level of reason only, or philosophically, I would say, on the natural level. And so I cannot say them, oh, you have to accept the Catholic faith, because the Catholic faith is the only one true. Of course this is true, but they would not understand this, so I have to argue, give us religion, because this is the demand of the human dignity. And so what we have in common with an atheist is at least to save the human dignity, at least. Even so, atheism will destroy human dignity. But we have to speak with them at least on this level. And so I understand the intention of the Council, of the document.
So when the Church has to come in contact with countries, states throughout the world that are not open to the Catholic faith. So before that you have the existence of Christendom, where you actually have this kind of overlap between the Christian faith and political countries. So there's not this negative reaction to it until you get like the reaction of in France, where they try to, for them, their understanding of religious liberty was a removal of all religion, and to set up basically reason became their goddess during the revolution. So this is going to speak countering that kind of view of religious liberty, and also the kind of view of the, how do we dialogue with a state that is atheistic? That how do we try to uphold and say, no, you have to respect the religion and give people freedom to be able to live out the religion that they have. So its base starts on truth, so that God himself has made certain truths known to man about how we are to serve him, and we know that the fullness of his truth is through the revelation that we receive from Jesus. We've learned about that in a number of the other talks that we gave. The one on divine revelation, he gives it to us through Scripture. The one about the church. So all of that is assumed in the background of this document, that the one true religion is the Catholic Church. So it's not in any way saying that the church isn't the one true, but as he mentioned in the video, an atheistic country isn't going to understand that, saying, well, you have to allow us to practice our religion because it's the true religion. Well, they're not going to be as sympathetic to that kind of an argument. So instead, you have to base it upon truth, like he said, philosophically. Because we believe that all men are bound to seek the truth, that our minds are actually made for understanding the truth. And once we know the truth, where it's part of us that we're required to hold fast to the truth. But we can never impose truth upon somebody else. You can't force somebody to believe something. Instead, it's truth itself, the document says, that it makes its entrance into the mind at once quietly and with power. So truth imposes itself just because of what it is. We shouldn't have to force truth upon somebody. Well, when they recognize something as being true, they should want to hold fast to it. Of course, that doesn't mean they always will. And if you want to know what truth is, Aristotle gives the classic definition of what truth is. So he says it's very easily in words of one syllable. So truth is very easy to know what it is. If a man says of what is that it is, or if a man says of what is not that it is not, then he speaks the truth. That's what truth is. It's pretty simple. So, how does truth fit in with religious freedom then? So religious freedom means being an immunity from coercion within society. So no one can force you to have a certain religion or not have a certain religion. How that connects with knowing that, well, there's only one truth, so how can everybody be free to have whatever religion they want? The document doesn't go too much into the aspect of how that fits together, but it says it leaves untouched the traditional Catholic doctrine on the moral duty of men and societies toward the one true religion and toward the Church of Christ. So Jesus, as Christ the King, everyone is subject to him, and everyone has a duty to the fullness of the truth, especially after we come to know it. So everyone is under his authority. That's why Jesus, says to Pilate, "You wouldn't have any power over me unless my Father gave it to you." Everything is under their authority. So traditionally, in the way the Church taught the relationship between the Church and the state, it always focused on this aspect. In this document, it says this is still true, but we're not focusing on that aspect. Unfortunately, some people misinterpreted the document, and it actually became one of the most controversial documents of the Council, because it seems as though they ignored this one section where it says, no, it's still true, we're just not talking about that part. But since then, you can actually find in the Catechism where it still mentions this in the Catechism, but I think you don't really hear it talked about very much. The aspect of Jesus Christ still being, his kingship still rules over all creation, and everyone is subject to him in a certain way. But how does that balance with freedom of religion? That they don't get into in this document as much. So, religious freedom, then, is that no one is to be forced to act in a manner contrary to their own beliefs, both privately and publicly, alone or with others. Of course, that freedom always has due limits. You can't obviously say, in the name of religion, I'm going to go out and start killing people, because then you're infringing upon the rights of others by doing that. So your freedom within reasonable limits. And this is a right based upon human dignity. And the document says it needs to be recognized in constitutional law. All right. The background of freedom was in our dignity, our human dignity. So it's based upon how God made us. And he made us to participate in his divine law. His divine law being the way that he set that he created the world. Not just simply his moral laws, but also how he created us. They go together. So for us to be free, we have to follow our conscience. And our conscience is the place within us where we understand God's divine law and we compare it to the action that we want to do. And if we see that the action's in accord with God's law, then it's a good action and we should do it. If it's not in accord with God's law, then it is a bad action, and so we don't do it. That's my diagram. I don't know if you remember that diagram from one of my previous presentations where we talked about conscience there. But nobody, this document says, can be forced to act contrary to their conscience. And no one can be restrained from acting according to their conscience. So the importance of having a freedom to follow our conscience. Of course, conscience doesn't mean to do whatever we want to do. It means to be able to do things in accordance with God's divine law insofar as we have understood it. So that's the thing where we always have to remember when we have the freedom to follow our conscience, we also have to form our conscience so that we can properly follow it. So man is social. So it requires that we be able to express religion in an exterior way, in a social way. And the document says, the Council Fathers say that it's an injury to our human dignity, to who we are as a person, if that free public exercise of religion in society is denied. So the government shouldn't simply allow us to express religion, but it even says it should go further. It should show favor to religion. Not just simply to command, but by showing favor doesn't mean that it forces people to show religious acts, nor can it prevent us from showing religious acts. So showing favor to religion because it recognizes the good that religion brings to society. Those who are living out a virtuous life because of religion really uplifts society, and so government should favor them. Should support society. All right. The rights of those who are religious, those who have religion. We're not talking about like religious brothers and sisters there. Those who are religious, so anyone, all of us. Government cannot be hindered in any way in the administration of their own ministers. So nobody can hinder the way where we put priests. Communication among the religious authorities can't prevent us from communicating with each other. The administration of the buildings, funds, properties, all of those things, we should be free to be able to use those. Freedom to be able to teach and witness, both spoken and being able to write things. But of course, we can't, through our teaching or witness, the things that we speak or say, we can't coerce, we can't force our religion upon others as well. So we're also bound by this kind of, if we expect freedom to be given to us, we also have to allow others to have freedom when it comes to religion as well. And then we should have the freedom to be able to show forth the value our beliefs have for society, to be able to explain why what we believe is a help to the common good. And we have to have freedom to gather together for meetings, for educational, cultural systems, charities, social organizations. So all of these are all public ways in which we have to be free to be able to express our religion within the greater society. And then in the family, there's a freedom for the family to be able to live out their faith as well. So to live within their own family under the guidance of the parents, so the parents being the leader of that domestic church. Parents have to have the freedom to determine how their children will be educated in their religion, and government has to acknowledge that right. That's what it says. And the fathers say that if the rights of the parents are violated, if their children are forced to attend instructions which are not in agreement with their religious beliefs. So to uphold religious freedom, they can't be forced to attend lessons that are contrary to what we believe. Then it gives some more duties of the government, that they are to protect and promote the rights of man, and included in there is religious freedom. We've already noticed a few ways in which it's mentioned things that the government should not do. But once again, it says that they should help create conditions favorable to the fostering of religious life. So they shouldn't set the conditions in a way that would deter someone from following their religion. A wrong is done when government imposes upon its people, by force or fear or other means, the profession or repudiation of any religion. So a government can't force a single religion upon everyone, but nor can it say that no one is allowed to have a religion either. Especially when it hinders men from joining or leaving, going from one religious community to another. And the reason why government has to protect religion is because that society profits so much by the moral qualities that's brought to it by those who are religious. So, if we're going to exercise religious freedom, we have to respect the rights of others, and we also have to realize our duties that we have toward others and the common good. That as religious people, we're not simply Catholics, but we're Catholics living in a country surrounded by other people. So we have a duty to assist others, and it fits right in with everything that we know as being Christians. So it fits with, that concept obviously is part of our Catholic teaching, so it fits right in. At the same time, society has a right to defend itself against possible abuses that are committed in the context of religion. So if, like I had mentioned earlier, someone just says, well, I'm going to go kill somebody else because my religion tells me I need to, then obviously society has a right to defend itself and say, no, you don't have the freedom to do that. Freedom specifically with Christianity, once again, it says that for us, particularly as Christians, so these concepts apply to all religions, to anyone. But specifically to Christianity, we really see how it's founded in the human dignity being made in God's image and likeness. So we know that it's rooted not just in philosophy, but it's also rooted in divine revelation that God gave to us. So we'll show how Jesus really teaches this kind of religious freedom. So we have to respect it because Jesus showed it. Our response to God has to be free, because that's how God's love is. If we want our love is going to model God's love. So God's love is freely given to us, so we have to freely give our love to God as well. So we can't force somebody else to follow him. If we do, then that's not love. So Jesus and how religious freedom fits in with what Jesus says. So Jesus obviously denounced people who did not believe, who did not follow him. But he did not outright condemn them. It says here, he left vengeance to God, to the Father, in expectation of the day of judgment. They will be judged. All of us will be judged. But he doesn't obviously want to condemn us. God is patient with us. He desires that our hearts be changed and converted to him. So he who believes will be saved, but he who does not believe will be condemned. But it says, he himself, noting that the weeds had been sown amid the wheat, gave orders that both should grow together until the harvest time. So, using this image, Jesus is not imposing his truth upon those who refuse to believe him. They have the freedom not to believe the truth. Even though we do have a duty to believe the truth, and we are subject to Jesus, he is not imposing it by force. guess you could say that eventually it is imposed, because when the judgment happens, but that's the other half. We have a freedom to search out the truth, but we don't have a freedom to cling to error. It's not a freedom that... The extent to which that freedom is given to us will lead us to eternal separation from God. So I guess you could say we have the freedom to fully reject Him, but that's really not true freedom. We're more free the easier it is to accept what God has given us. So, the apostles then, they carried on this way of preaching that Jesus began. So their gentleness, their respectfulness to those to whom they preached, and they depended upon the power of God's Word. That this is truth. So truth itself is going to bring Him in. It's God's work, not our own. But at the same time, they didn't hesitate to speak against the governing powers of their time. So here we have this wonderful passage where they say it's necessary to obey God rather than men. We're not going to stop preaching of the gospel simply because you don't want us to. You can throw us in jail again and again and again, but we're just going to keep doing it because it's necessary to obey God and not men. So we want to be able to follow that today as well. Religious freedom then coming today. So you find in many places religious freedom is a civil right in most constitutions, and it's recognized in international documents. But it does go on to say, at that time, and still today, the time this was written, that the freedom of, that a lot of times you find freedom of religious worship there, but then you find the government engaged in ways in which they're preventing citizens from professing their religion. Should be on many of our minds. Specific examples in our own country, and which will be mentioned in this.
We talk about religious freedom. It's not just freedom of worship. It's freedom to carry out our traditions in a way that is not impinged by government harassment or control. And years ago, even 10 years ago, we would not have thought that this would have been a problem in the United States. But it is a very serious problem. It's certainly not the condition of the Christians in the Holy Land or in other places. But there is a gradual but real moving in on the government to isolate our activities in the United States. We can become pretty soft in our cultures, Western culture, certainly in the United States. We pick and choose what beliefs we'll take out of our church and go through the externals and not really struggle to keep the faith alive. And the secular influences in our country certainly rub off and are influencing our Catholic people. And I think to hold to the basics of the truths of our faith, it's going to take sacrifice anytime, anywhere, among any people. And sometimes we Americans can forget that. And I would hope that the more we become conversant with the trials, not just in the Holy Land of our Christians, but the tremendous persecution of the church in China and other places, in Korea and Vietnam. We have to become more aware of what they're going through and realize why they're so steadfast, because the church and the faith means everything to them, and sometimes it does not mean as much as it should to us.
Yeah, so I think, especially with the things having to do with the HHS mandate, the violations upon not giving us protection to be able to have the freedom to follow our consciences, hopefully it's beginning to wake up some of us. And it's part of all of our job is to continue to make it aware, because it hasn't changed at all since the issue first came up. And as he was mentioning, it should make us greater aware that what we've had in the past, the freedom of religion, isn't automatic. This is a map of government restrictions on religion throughout the world. The yellow is low, and as it gets to red, that's very high restrictions of the government on religion. So if you look at that, there's a lot of area around the world where religious freedom is not given in full. And even now, ours is no longer low, it's up to moderate now. So this is a Pew study from 2012. Just on Tuesday, I think it was, on Tuesday, the United States Commission for International Religious Freedom issued its annual report. And so it highlights religious freedom and its state from last year. And it identifies the governments that are the worst violators of religious freedom. And the annual report included more countries than it ever has. 29 were specifically addressed, and at least 22 additional countries that were discussed in kind of overarching themes. So religious freedom is definitely an important issue. And as he was saying, he mentioned specifically, since he's involved with the Holy Land, of being one. Many other countries, that they've mentioned in the report: Burma, China, Eritrea, Iran, North Korea, Saudi Arabia, Sudan, Uzbekistan, had all been kind of in this highest countries of particular concern. And then they added, just this year, 7 more countries into the high concern: Egypt, Iraq, Nigeria, Pakistan, Tajikistan, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, Turkmenistan, and Vietnam. So there's many places where religious freedom is not a given. So as he said, we have to protect it. Otherwise, we too could lose it as well. Opportunities for questions before we go and ask about the impact of this. Questions, comments about religious freedom? Yeah.
What about that schooling of Common Core that the federal government wants all the states? There's like 5 states that don't have it yet, and we're one of them.
Oops. Sorry.
Do you have any,
I don't really know much of the details about that,
Okay.
so I don't think I can speak to it.
The federal government will try to tell us.
Yeah. Yeah, in Catholic social doctrine, there's the principles of subsidiarity and solidarity, that higher powers shouldn't impose upon where the lower powers can do where it's their role to be in charge there. So the higher powers shouldn't come in and do that. So I would say of applying those principles when you look at those details to see, are they impinging upon where they really ought to be. Jerry, did you have
You had made a comment that this is to apply to all religions. I kept thinking about Islam, and most of us and how they're Jews and things like that.
Sorry.
So what would the basis of what the governments use to make law? Would it be natural law, or it's not going to be Christianity throughout the world? So what
How
would
would
they use to say, why is murder wrong? So if you would,
What's the basis for moral law within a?
right. Or any, the lowest common denominator of the government, what would it be?
That's a good question. And that kind of, it involves because there is and I'll get into here, one of the mistaken thoughts from, and it was a thought before this document, and I don't think it really comes out of the document itself, was that there's this complete separation between religious belief, church, and state. That there is no overlap, no touch between, but that's not at all the case. Obviously, it's not in the way it's describing it. There's overlap there. I mean, we're part of the common good. So there's really, it's more of a cooperation. Obviously, we're really not, I mean, I don't think, it's not really the vision of the church that we go back to something like the time of Christendom, where, you know, the government and the church become so mixed that you really almost can't tell the difference between them. That's really not ideal. But yeah, it's true because, you know, if it's a completely secular state, what basis do they have? And so well, in a sense, that's when you have those kind of atheist kind of states, it's where you have egregious problems occurring and human dignity being violated. Like our first video, you know, he mentioned, you know, hopefully we have in common the desire to uphold human dignity with the atheist, but ultimately the atheist is going to atheism destroys human dignity. So yeah, that is there is a part where we as Christians need to bring our faith into the public square so that we can be the basis. I mean, because our country, the principles that were created were Christian principles. You know, inalienable rights given to us by God, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. You know, all those things that you see in the Declaration of Independence, you know, are Christian teachings. So.
One of the comments you made was we're bound to follow our conscience, which I believe, but conscience is, how do you define conscience? Because it seems like we've lost our moral principles in the United States, at least in the United States of America. Even amongst Catholics, there's an awful lot of people who believe things that are contrary to the teachings of the church, and there's an awful lot of, you know, what's good for me may be good for me and not good for you, but I need to follow what's good for me rather than following what God has laid down.
Yeah, it's an understanding of conscience as conscience is whatever I think is right, as opposed to conscience should be what is God's divine law and make sure my action is in accord with divine law. So we have to form the conscience so that it fits in with divine law. So you're right, that's actually, let me go to that. So what was mistaken? There's a few things. So I'm going to talk about right now this third one. So I already mentioned this one. The idea of a complete separation between church and state is really not envisioned. Instead, it's this dialogue, this cooperation, where faithful religious people are actually working within the state and assisting it. Also, religious liberty is not. It's not a license to. It's not a moral license to adhere to error, to do whatever we want. It's not a right to err anyway. So, this is from some so-called Catholic website, where in response to the bishop's assessment of the women's religious organization, they're trying to say religious liberty for all, not just for the bishops. Well, the thing is that the bishops are representing the true teaching of the church. So if you want to be free to be a Catholic, or freedom of religion does not mean a freedom to call yourself Catholic but not believe the things that it means to be a Catholic. So Catholics don't have a religious liberty to believe whatever they want and still call themselves Catholic. You have, you're free definitely not to believe those things, but you can't call yourself Catholic anymore. You know, because we as the Catholic faith has the freedom to be what it is. You know, when someone says, "Well, this group we're Catholics, but we don't believe we don't believe these things the Catholic Church says," well, they're refusing to allow the Catholic Church the freedom to be what it is. So, I don't know. Is that making sense? Am I describing it well?
Well, it's the ultimate relativism.
Yeah.
Which is the foundation of what you're talking about with atheism, which if you look at it, truly has no moral foundation at all because they don't believe in it.
Right.
So there is no foundation where they make a moral decision if you're truly an atheist. There is none.
That's why I was wondering about that.
Yeah.
So, but then they keep trying to define everything else these days and say, well, we say what religious liberty is, and you know.
Yeah.
Then they get power and get on the Supreme Court, and then they make law. And so you've got to
Yeah.
keep fighting it.
Yeah, it's not easy to defend religious freedom. And as you can see, from that map, obviously, it's not easy to defend it because many places are not experiencing religious freedom right now. So, let's see. The good things from this document, it clarifies the fact that about religious freedom and you're not able to impose religion on others. It gives us principles from which to address secular states that we're now in. There's probably other things as well. Mistaken, and we already talked about these two. And then there's thirdly, the de-emphasis or the denial of the kingship of Christ and the truth of the Catholic Church. That even some Catholics deny that the Church at one time had said this. So it's kind of relativism that comes out of it. So what remains to be done? We have to defend our religious freedom, both here in the United States and away. This summer, there's going to be a second Fortnight for Freedom. I don't know if, hopefully, a number of you are aware that there was one last year, the 14 days before the 4th of July. And what we did here at the parish is we had holy hours every single night from 9 to 10 at the church. And so I'm planning on doing that again this year for the Fortnight. So I encourage you to come and to pray. And actually, last year during the Fortnight, there were reflections I did every night that the USCCB gave us, and they were on this document that we just went over. So an ability to go into more specific detail over the course of the nights, reflecting upon what religious liberty means for us now today. All right, we're going to go ahead and begin again. The second document is called Nostra Aetate on non-Christian religion. So we've talked about how everybody has to have a freedom to be able to practice religion. So if everyone's going to have a freedom, and we obviously believe that the Catholic Church has the only true religion, how are we going to view these other religions? Obviously, we've already given them a freedom to be able to live out their beliefs. So the origin of religion, the Council Fathers say, is an answer to questions that arise in our heart. Now, that's what makes man different from any other creature, is we have these kinds of questions. We wonder about, who are we? What are we? What's the meaning? What's the goal of our life? What's good? What's evil? Where does this suffering come from? And what's it for? How do I get to true happiness? What's going to make me happy? Death, judgment. What happens after death? Where did we come from? Where are we going? All these kinds of questions arise in our hearts naturally. Sometimes we try to push them away, cover them up, but they're always there. And we need to answer them. And so religion really comes in response to these questions that are in our heart. And through these questions, we begin to perceive some kind of hidden power. It says that hovers over the course of things and the events of history. And at times people have been able to perceive and recognize this supreme being, and even a personal, even that of a father-type being. So all these different religions are proposing different ways. They have teachings, they have rules of life that they follow, they have sacred rituals that are part of them, that all are reflecting answers to these questions in the heart. And often, the fathers say that they reflect a truth, a ray of truth, because, it comes out of ourselves, and, God, who is truth, has made all of us. We're in His image. Our questions are going to image Him, are going to reflect Him. So our role is going to be, through dialogue and collaboration, to recognize, preserve, promote the good things, spirituality, the morals, the values that we find in other religions. So to help us understand that a little bit better, I have a diagram. So, and this kind of comes from our one man who is really good at kind of reflecting on this, and it really affected how he wrote and what he wrote was a Catholic, J.R.R. Tolkien, who wrote The Lord of the Rings. He and he's got this wonderful dialogue between him and C.S. Lewis, because C.S. Lewis is, and they're discussing about between paganism, pagan myths, and Christianity. And Tolkien has this great respect for pagan mythology, and C.S. Lewis does too. He loves it, but he says, too bad it's lies, because I mean it's wrapped in this beautiful cloak, but it's just lies. And Tolkien said, well, no, it's not lies. That there's truth there. So this diagram is going to help us understand kind of how Tolkien saw those other, especially the pagan religions. So other religions, all these questions in the heart, involves man searching, striving to understand God, who this supreme being is. But because we're limited, we can't get all the way there. We might be able to come up with truths to know some things about God. In fact, we can know a number of things about God without having to have faith. We can know God exists simply through our reason. But we can't know everything about God. And so it's very easy to bring in things that are false connected with things that are true. And so that's how Tolkien sees these pagan myths, that they're like fragments of the truth, even though they do contain error within them. But then you get into the Judeo-Christian, and I include the Jewish faith in with our Christian faith, because this is fundamentally different. Here you have man striving for God, but now God reaches down to man and reveals himself to us. The only way we can understand a being that is transcendent is for him to come and reveal himself to us. And so that's what we find God doing throughout the whole Old Testament to the Jewish people. He comes and has to convince them very vigorously that there is only one God, as opposed to all the neighbors. And then the Christian comes, and God reveals himself in the ultimate way by becoming one of us. So that's the fundamental difference between Judeo-Christianity and all of the religions, is that for us, God has come and himself revealed who he is to us. But we see all of the religions as being able to have those bits of truth in them because, God made man anyway, and he made them for him. So they're going to come up with some bits and pieces of truth. So this document is going to go through some of the major, very briefly, some of the major religions through the world. So here's kind of a, I don't know if you can see the legend there, but so this is kind of where some of the religion is. The purple and blue is Christianity, so a lot of Christianity over here, and there in Europe. Orthodox in Russia. The green is Islam, and the orange is Hinduism. The yellow is Buddhism mixed with other Chinese religion. It's in China. So you see, those are the major places where those religions can be found throughout the world. You do find, with our global society, there's mixing in, but for the most part, the vast majority of people in those areas have those religions. So the document goes through some of the major ones, since it's kind of giving kind of an overview of how we see all other religions. So it looks at Hinduism, and it mentions certain key elements. Obviously, Hinduism is very complicated, and there's different forms of it, so it can't go into all that. But it mentions how there's a contemplation of divine mystery, which is a good thing. To contemplate divine mystery. It expresses it through myths, and we saw how Tolkien helps us to appreciate something of myths. So there's some kind of, so we should expect certain truths for them to adhere to, mixed with error. And they search for the divine mystery also, not just through myths, but through philosophy and through reason, which is a good thing. We use that philosophy as well, and they seek for release from suffering through ascetical practices, which we also share something of that with them, ascetical practices. And there's also a cultivation of trust and love. They wouldn't call him God, necessarily, but of the divine. So there's a few images that kind of represent. There's Shiva, one of their gods, and one of their celebrations. And I mapped out here of where, of kind of the distribution of where you find Hinduism. So mostly in India. Hinduism is really the third largest of religions, about 800 million people adhere to it. Buddhism is the second one. Some of its characteristics: it realizes the radical insufficiency of this changeable world, which is a good thing, because I mean we agree our world is fallen and flawed, and it's limited. Then it teaches a way by which men in a devout and confident spirit may be able either to acquire the state of perfect liberation or attain by their own efforts or through higher help supreme illumination. So some of those aspects we might be able to agree, and other aspects we're not going to be able to agree. Same thing with Hinduism. There's other things that we're not going to be able to agree with, but some things that we can forms a basis of beginning of a dialogue between them. So, for example, by their own efforts, we would say we can't attain any kind of perfect liberation by our own efforts. It requires the grace of God. So there, once again, you see a distribution of where you find it, mostly over in China and the surrounding area. Though that's statue of Buddha. I think that was in Japan. I think is where you find that one in particular. And that wheel is it represents the Noble Eightfold Path, which is kind of their path for leading them to their spiritual illumination kind of thing. All right. Islam adores the one God, so we share that, and they see God in a different way that we do, though. So it's not exactly the same. Obviously, they don't see God as Trinity, and so there's certain differences there, but they are monotheistic the way we are too. So it takes pains to submit themselves to even those commands God has that they don't understand, which in a sense that should be the same thing that we do. We should submit ourselves to God even in those ways in which we don't understand why. But they don't acknowledge Jesus as God, but they do revere him as a prophet, and they do honor Mary. They do have a belief in a day of judgment. They value a moral life, and they spend time worshiping God, especially through prayer, fasting, and almsgiving, which we also would do. So you see there's similarities, but also differences.
Ramadan is a good time to reflect on Christian-Muslim relations, because it is the month in which Muslims live an intense spiritual life, and it is a strong sign of obedience towards the Lord. The Church accepted all what is right, beautiful in other religions. If we recall, for example, the crossing of Pope Paul VI of the Via Dolorosa, something very, very moving, where Christians and Muslims mixed to receive him with great simplicity and open heart. If we go to the discourse of the Holy Father in Assisi, Pope Benedict didn't accuse a specific religion of violence, but the message was clear. We cannot afford violence committed in the name of religion, so as religious leaders we should meet the challenge. So religious leaders should say clearly, this does not represent our religion. We condemn this violence. We condemn attacking believers in prayer. Pope Benedict quoted a dialogue between a Christian emperor and a Muslim scholar of those times, in which the scholar said that the Muslim religion was spread through violence, and that Islam didn't bring anything new. So, quoting this author, was considered by some Muslims as the Holy Father was endorsing that position. And he said clearly it is not. He only was quoting this dialogue, and he didn't adopt the content of that dialogue. The Pope was trying to say that we have two gifts from the Lord, reason and faith, and we had partners that said, okay, why we do not choose this theme for a joint colloquium? And in fact, we hold a colloquium with our Iranian partners on faith and reason. And this is a beautiful example how misunderstanding could be resolved in dialogue, not in protest or in violence. In dialogue, we do not make explicit appeal to others to embrace our religion. But this doesn't mean that we are not faithful to our faith and to our mission, because in dialogue we say what we are. And then if I have the occasion to correct my image in the mind of my interlocutor, and in the same time to give him the possibility to do the same towards me, then I am missionary. I'm not preaching, but it is obvious that we all should become every day better Catholics, better believers. We should be rooted in our religion. We should know, we should study, we should ask when we don't know. We should also know the minimum about those religions with which believers we are living and relating to.
I don't know if you recall what the incident where he said the lessons from Regensburg. I don't know if you recall that a number of years ago. It must have been at least in 2008 or before that. So when the Pope has, in his talk, like he said, he references this this ancient writer, really to make a point showing that what he's saying is not true. But to make a point about how faith and reason work together, and it was misconstrued. And so as he described, there was good that came out of it, that there was a colloquium between the Pontifical Council for Interreligious Dialogue and the Center for Interreligious Dialogue of the Islamic Culture of Iran. And they have ended with a joint declaration, and they agreed upon a number of things like faith and reason are both gifts from God to mankind. That might seem to be kind of a simple thing, but as Catholics we've always seen faith and reason together, but not always the case for the way that Islam views God. Theirs is based upon whatever the will of God is. Not God's will may or may not necessarily match up with reason. So that's actually a big thing to agree that faith and reason are both gifts from God, that they don't contradict each other, that faith and reason are intrinsically non-violent. So a number of about 7 different things that they came to agreement on in that kind of dialogue. So it's a kind of fruit that came out of even this instance of misunderstanding at first. Then Judaism. This document says the most about Judaism because it's really the closest of the non-Christian religions to us. The church itself grew out of it. We received revelation of the Old Testament, and as we received that revelation, it says that God then concluded the ancient covenant with them and continued his covenant with the people. But we'll find on the next page, we'll talk about how God doesn't, in a sense, revoke the promises and the gifts that he gave to those people. So we, as a church, draw sustenance from the things that come to us from our Jewish brothers and sisters. That, in a sense, we're like grafted on, like the Gentiles are grafted on to onto the people of God. So they contain, so the spiritual connection that we have between the two of us runs very deep. And I think one of the greatest resources that I know of is it's a series of books, or you can actually find the talks online. But these books were written by a professor of mine, Dr. Lawrence Feingold, and he actually was my second reader for when I did my thesis in the seminary. His background was he was Jewish, then for a time he was atheist, and through his experience of being an artist, he came back and entered the Catholic Church. And so he's part of an organization called Hebrew Catholics, and so it's basically Catholics who are proud of their Hebrew heritage. And so these books talk about the mystery of the Church and the mystery of Israel and the Church. So it makes so many connections between what God did for the people of God in the Old Testament, for the Jewish people, and how things were fulfilled in the Church. And so they're wonderful, wonderful books. And you can actually find, and it'll be on the website and the emails that I send out, links to where you can find the talks that he gave that these books are based on. So, but I use these a lot for homilies and such because they're so rich in making those connections between the Old and New Testament. All right. So God, like I said, holds the Jews dear because they were his chosen people in the Old Testament. And he does not repent of the gifts that he gave them. So here we find St. Paul says in Romans that theirs is the sonship and the glory, the covenants, the law, the worship, the promises. They're the fathers, and from them came the Christ. So God cannot be against them. And I'm guessing that probably if any of you were at Father Damien's Bible study on Romans, that this passage is taken out of there's a larger context where Paul is describing the relationship between the church now established and, well, what about the Jewish people? And it's a beautiful passage within Romans. So the church iterates that there can be no basis for anti-Semitism. That what happened to Jesus cannot be charged to all the Jewish people. In fact, we should be more quick to charge it to all of ourselves. It's our sins that caused him to die for us. So Jews cannot be presented as being
Benedict
rejected
XVI
or
reaffirmed the
cursed
Church's
by God
support
because
for
they are
Nostra
not.
Aetate, the declaration published by the Second Vatican Council, which outlines dialogue between Catholics and Jews. He did this during an audience with a group of Jewish leaders from the Chief Rabbinate of Israel in preparation for his upcoming trip to the Holy Land.
The Church recognizes that the beginnings of her faith are found in the historical divine intervention in the life of the Jewish people, and that here our unique relationship has its foundation.
Jewish leaders praised the Vatican's response to the controversy over Bishop Richard Williamson that strained Jewish-Catholic relations. They considered the matter resolved.
I must say that we couldn't expect a stronger commitment to continue dialogue and warm friendship between the Jewish people, Judaism and Christianity, and a pleasant and warm atmosphere like we had this morning in the audience. It was not just another meeting, it was really a turning point that starts again the relationship.
Rabbi Cohen also said that the episode gave the Holy See an opportunity to strengthen its position against anti-Semitism and the Holocaust. He also recommended to the Pope that the Church include teaching about the Holocaust and anti-Semitism in Catholic schools.
That policy should be a main subject of teaching and understanding, which I believe is going to happen.
The members of the delegation all said they were looking forward to Benedict XVI's upcoming trip to the Holy Land, and that he would be warmly received during his visit.
So you can see continued dialogue with the Jewish people, Jewish leaders, are an important part of interreligious dialogue through the Vatican. And I think if I remember correctly, that specific instance they mentioned about the bishop was an instance where he had denied or was questioning whether or not the Holocaust had occurred, which would understandably cause some tension there. So you can see how in the midst of that was resolved again through this kind of dialogue. So the short document concludes saying that we can't truly be the ones who call on God, who call Him Father, if we refuse to treat everyone around us in a brotherly way. That they are all created in the image of God, whether or not they, at this moment, share with us the one true faith. But that we, like Scripture says, is to maintain good fellowship among all the nations, to bring peace, so that through our time together we will bring them deeper to be truly sons of God. So, questions, comments, answers to these questions in response to that document. Of course, there's lots of aspects of interreligious dialogue that could be talked about. If not, go ahead.
Has there been any updates or modifications at all in the last 40 plus years since I continued?
Oh, you mean other documents?
No, I was thinking more specifically about our relationship with Islam, religion.
Well, like there's been an ongoing dialogue. Like, for example, that joint declaration between the group from Iran that settled upon these kinds of points about faith and reason. So there's been things like that as well. But see, the difficulty with that is, there's different versions of Islam, and you have the main ones, and then you have the militant offshoots, which it's very, very difficult to be in dialogue with those because they don't want to be in dialogue. It's not really part of their so it's in a sense supporting the larger group of Muslims that are not that violence isn't part of their religion, to in a sense show forth that say, no, this is truly what Islam is about. It's not about this violence, and so counteract those who are. Like last time when we talked about ecumenism. So they're different because it kind of runs a different course. There's the things that we have in common with Christianity. We should have this common of all wanting to be one, whereas with religions, there's not that common ground of coming together. So the goal of interreligious dialogue is, there's no necessarily of all becoming one religion through that. Ultimately, our goal is to witness to the truth of our faith, not to force things, give them the freedom to follow their religion. But, ultimately we want all people to come to know Christ. But interreligious dialogue is different from the kind of things that occur within ecumenism type. So like for example, every time an important like feast or festival each year comes up for for Hinduism or whatever, the Vatican will issue some kind of and talk about something we have in common. Like I think for the letter that they sent to leaders for the recent festival that just happened for Hindus, it was talking about building up, kind of this understanding of peace and nonviolence within the youth. So it's something that we have in common with them, but can be a problem today with certain versions of those who practice that faith. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to say something
Uh-huh.
I have to respond to.
Oh, yeah,
And,
yeah.
You can say that different Catholics, they don't believe in the Trinity,
Mm-hmm.
but we never hear that, Islam is not a true Islamist, they're murdering for religion, because they aren't holding to their true values.
Yeah, yeah.
They shouldn't even be considered Islam.
Mm-hmm.
So we as Americans
Yeah.
give enough credit to that part of it,
Mhm.
and then also they believe in more of the Bible than even the Jews do. They believe in all the New Testament and the Old Testament.
Mm-hmm.
So when I see up there that there's Judaism and Christianity,
Mm-hmm.
and Islam's not part of that, it's kind of sad to me because they do believe in the entire Bible.
Mhm,
And they
mhm.
have a book on Mary, and they
Yeah.
believe in Jesus as a prophet, but even
Mhm.
the entire prophet.
Well, you're right. There's some connection there, and I would say, part of the difference is that some of their sources of revelation comes from outside of the revelation that we seek is coming from God. So,
They believe in natural law.
yeah. So, like for example, there's sources of revelation like through the Quran. We don't, as Catholics, see the Quran as being given by God in the same way as the Bible. So that's why I would say that you're right. That's why Islam is so close to Judeo-Christian, because it has a lot of those overlaps. But it also has some of those sources where you would say it's man reaching up to God. They have also those sources where God has reached down to them, because in a sense they received it through the Judeo-Christian background that came before them. Yeah. So does that kind of make sense? So I'm not trying to say that that they're terrible, because obviously, this document is, its desire is to respect all of the religions of what they have, but to recognize that there are, those differences. Yeah.
I get more of education
Yeah.
there to see what somebody else saw.
Yeah.
And then I know my own background, so it's so much in common, and people need to focus on their
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and that's what part of the dialogue is for, is to focus on, we have things in common. Yeah. To recognize, there might be some differences. But yeah, so a lot of times the same thing with, the Jewish religion is how close we are with many, many things. We share this kind of heritage with each other. So it brings this, it's so much easier for us as Catholics to dialogue, to discuss religion with those of a Jewish or an Islamic background than it is to discuss things with, a Buddhist or a Hindu or any of the other many other kinds of religions that you find, because we do have things like that in common. But thank you for bringing that up. All right, so good. There's many things that would be good, but I just put a couple of things. So the dialogue, the cooperations between other religions, the ability to work through misunderstandings that may come up. I think that's a wonderful thing, so that if one may misunderstand what one is saying, to clarify what's mistaken. An idea that all religions are simply different paths that will lead you to the same place. We don't believe that as Catholics. We believe that Jesus Christ is the only way to salvation. So that not all religions are not automatically paths to Christ. They may have bits of truth, like we mentioned before, but they also have error contained within them as well. And then the incorporation of teachings from other religions that are not compatible with Catholic faith into a Catholic life. So there's certain, like I had mentioned earlier, it's like, well, we share these certain ideas, but there's also certain things that just don't fit in. So, for example, the bringing in certain kinds of Eastern spirituality into like trying to turn it into to make it be Catholic. So, for example, certain kinds of meditation practices that really don't fit with the Christian way of meditating or contemplating, because it would be a clear mind of everything, so that there's like nothing there. Well, that's not a Catholic way to meditate. A Catholic way to meditate is not to clear everything out. It's to bring God in. It's to focus on Jesus, on God. So I mean, which is an important distinction. So you can say, yeah, we agree that we should meditate, that we should contemplate, but not to remove us from everything, but instead to place us in God's presence. So just different practices that can occur. So I would say, I mean, the document itself isn't necessarily a cause for that, but yeah, see, that's a what I would say about that is yoga has its origins, are different forms of it, both from Hinduism and Buddhism. And so the spiritual underpinnings of that, if what you're doing is a yoga that involves those kind of spiritual concepts, then that would not be appropriate. Now, and I wonder, since I've never really looked into that too much, but I wonder if there are certain classes that call themselves yoga that are simply doing exercises, but really have no foundations in the real yoga itself. Yeah. Yeah. So that would be my guess, is that, so in a sense it would almost be like, should we really be calling it that if the word yoga really means this spiritual practice that comes from these Eastern religions? Because if it's involving that spirituality as a part of that exercise or those movements, then I would say that that's not a good thing to do. But if it's doing some kind of exercises, just simply the exercises, and now you're calling it yoga because that's what everybody calls it, I would say, well, maybe we should call it something else. That way we don't have confusion. Yeah.
I've been doing yoga here since it started in September, and that is what it is, strictly the exercise to gain balance, to get our muscles stronger. It's strictly exercise.
Yeah. So not knowing specific details, I'd have to evaluate the specific ones each, and I've never sat in on the ones that we have here. But
I realize what you're saying on that, and the Christian go out and make disciples would not be in our favor to say the yoga pull people in maybe from those other Eastern cultures in order to bring them into the Christian church.
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, remember one point he said is that the goal of interreligious dialogue is not specifically, or one important principle is to remain true to our faith as well. So we want to draw them in because the truth has grabbed hold of them. So in a sense, the most important thing for us to do in witnessing to those other religions is to live out faithfully what we have been given through our faith. And I think a lot of times Catholics have turned to some of those Eastern spirituality kinds of things because, especially us as priests, we failed you. We have not given you the vast treasures of the spiritual wealth that you find through the saints. Because there's so much wealth there that I think many people don't know about because we haven't taught you. So in a sense, for us, there's no need to look elsewhere to find these kind of techniques or things to try to connect with God, because we have many, many forms of spirituality that fit perfectly with the things that we believe as Catholics. So.
First statement. And
Yes.
Was mistaken.
Yes, that's mistaken.
Like, is that saying, like,
Jews, and that's all you know.
It's
And
yeah.
that's all you follow, and that's all you've ever known.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't there still an opportunity that God is going to bring you to heaven? I mean,
Yes,
that's
it's
all
possible,
you
but
know.
any salvation that comes to anybody is always through Christ. So, even if somebody is in a different religion, if they're going to be saved, if they're going to go to heaven, it's going to be because of what Christ does. So, like if they believe that, well, if I empty myself, if I follow these kinds of practices and that will make me reach enlightenment, well, that's not a way that your salvation is not going to come by your own power by doing those kind of practices. It's going to come by Christ. So that's
Because Christ would intervene and say, yes, you follow that, even if they may not even know
well,
who Christ is.
you're right. It's possible God can use extraordinary means. The ordinary means is to draw us into His church, into the life of the sacraments that give us the greatest ability to follow Him. Is it possible for God to save somebody because of invincible ignorance? They had no fault of their own, never knew Christ. It's possible He can do that because He's a loving Father and He's an infinite God. So you're right, He can. But we can't say that all those other religions are simply other paths that are going to automatically make them reach to God.
So because as Catholics, we know the truth and it's our path, but God may intervene.
Well, it's everyone's path. Remember, religious freedom doesn't mean you have a right to adhere to things that are in error. You have a right to seek truth.
Well,
And
I'm just saying other people didn't know. If they didn't know,
yeah. Uh-huh.
I mean,
Well, so we say it's a possibility,
Okay.
but we're as disciples. That is, and we talked. I mean, that was the whole session on the lay apostolate. It's part of our mission to go forth and spread the news, spread the good news of the gospel, to tell them, what will bring us the most happiness is for this personal relationship with Christ. That would be one way to look about it, is to say, well, I really don't need to tell anybody else about my faith because we're all going to end up in the same place anyway. Well, that's a wrong way to look at things. That's a presumption that this person will be able, it's almost like, well, God, I know you're somehow you'll be able to do it, so I'm going to not really do what you've asked me to do. As Christians, He told the disciples to go forth and to preach the good news, baptize all nations. So we can't stand back from that duty, that calling that He's given us, simply because we know that there could be a possible way that He could save someone else. So yeah, it's still an important duty for us. So, and that's what it means when we say that, no, all religions are not simply just different ways God has given other people to get to Him. Remember, the difference is that they were striving for Him but on their own power, but it wasn't the way that God gave to us. The way that He gave to us came through the Judeo-Christian revelations that He gave to us. All right, so what remains to be done? Here's some principles that comes out of a document from the Pontifical Council for Interreligious Dialogue called Christian Witness in a Multi-Religious World. So, acting in God's love, imitating Jesus Christ, living the Christian virtues, doing acts of service and justice. So all of these kinds of things are steps that we can do that basically witnesses to the faith. In a world that has other religions around it. So basically, fundamentally being who we're created to be as Christians. All right. So the last document is also fairly short, and I'll go through it quickly. I'll probably have to skip over some things here. It's called Inter Mirifica, the Media of Social Communications. If you really want an in-depth version of this, this is a classmate of mine, Father Jason Signalis, is a priest who's ordained the same year as me for the Bismarck Diocese, and he gave a talk in February on this very document. And the reason why I would say he's better equipped to handle all sorts of things having to do with this area is because before he entered the seminary,
we know that Jesus has given us all the command to
and
go
also
out,
he did his master's
go into the whole world and proclaim the gospel
on this
to
topic
every
of
creature.
social communication and the church.
So
I had
we
a clip
all,
here
as
from
baptized Christians, have
where
that
he goes
duty.
through some of the history,
And we exercise it in
some
many,
of the other
many
documents
different
that kind of
ways.
lead up to the Second Vatican Council and
By
the other ones that
the
came
way we live our
afterwards.
lives, by what we say, and also by how we say it. Over the last century, rapidly changing technology has constantly altered the way that we communicate with each other. Consequently, the way we carry out this duty to share the gospel is also changing in a certain way. So going from, ancient clay tablets to parchment to the TV to the internet to mobile devices that are always connected, these things have had profound effects on many different things, for better or for worse. And just like so many other things, these are tools that can be used for good or for ill. And the Church, like a good parent, wants to protect us from what is harmful, what is evil, and wants to guide us towards what is good and virtuous. And when it comes to communications, the Church has always had something to say. Going back to 1931, when Vatican Radio was established, then 1936, Pius XI came out with a document on television, or on motion pictures. Then in 1957, there was a document on movies, TV, and radio. In 1963, early in the Council, this document, which I'm talking about today, Inter Mirifica, was promulgated. Then the World Communications Day. Every year, the Holy Father, beginning in 1967 on, the Holy Father has had a little reflection on the current state of communications. And that's been a great godsend to us. If we read those documents now, like we can read what Pope Benedict had to say this last year about social networking, and then in the previous years about the value of silence and the true nature of friendship, and how things like Facebook and so on are affecting that notion in society. In 1971, there was a document on a pastoral instruction on social communications. 1975, a document on evangelization. 1986, there was a guide to the training of seminarians in social communications. Apparently they were watching too much TV, so they had to tell them to turn it off. If you read the document, it actually does talk about that. 1992, there was another pastoral instruction. Then there's documents in 2000, 2002, 2005. The Church has had a lot to say about this subject, and for purposes of brevity, I'll only focus on the one document today, which kind of set the groundwork for everything that was to follow.
Among the wonderful, that's what Inter Mirifica means. So among all the wonderful technologies of social communication, the Council mentions the press, movies, radio, television. Obviously, they couldn't mention some of these other things because they didn't exist yet, but they would be included too. So they said it can be used for good, but it can be used for ill. So, and we've all experienced that, how all of the different communications can be used for good or ill. So the Council is positive about things. They say it can be used for good, but it's also not naive. It knows what the limitations are. So the duty of the Church, as it always is to announce the gospel. So it has a right to use these kinds of forms of media to be able to do that. So pastors should have the task of instructing the faithful to use the media in a safe manner. Perhaps we've failed in certain ways to instruct how that is to be done, especially difficulty of keeping up with all of the new ones coming out and giving those practical ways in which to keep us safe. Laity are to strive to instill a human and Christian spirit into those media. So no matter whatever kind of media it is that comes up, it's to put instill us as Christians. I mean, that was when we talked about the lay apostolate. This is the lay apostolate in the realm of media. And we have a right to receive information that's true, complete, and properly and decently communicated. That always happens, right? Maybe not always. Continuing on, it compares the right of art has versus the moral order. So calling something art does not mean it can be morally offensive. So there's a certain artistic license, we use that term, but human dignity has to be respected in the midst of that. We can use the media to even portray moral evil, but it has to have a purpose. Because you could portray it in a way in which it simply does harm. So all of those kind of, the kind of movies that are like horror, slasher kind of movies, that are just blood and gore. I mean, what purpose do those have, really? Compared with the kind of violence you find in the movie For Greater Glory, or The Lord of the Rings. They have a lot of violence in there, or The Passion of Christ. I mean, all those have violence. But the violence has a purpose of revealing the true moral order, even while portraying violence. So there's a proper way in which moral evil can be portrayed in contrast with what is morally good. So there's obligations, the document says, toward those who are consumers. So all of us as consumers, to make proper choices, avoid those things that may cause us harm, that be occasions for sin. But then to fully favor presentations that are outstanding for promoting moral goodness, and especially those that are high in artistic and technical merit too, of presenting them. To use moderation, self-control when using the different forms of media. Parents have a special obligation to especially guard what kind of things their children come in contact with. Media producers also have obligations. They just can't produce whatever they want. But they're supposed to be there to help lead the human race to good. They can lead them to evil as well, by whatever they give to us to consume. So it says they must adjust their economic, political, or artistic and technical aspects so as never to oppose the common good. I wonder how many of them have that in mind. We have to adjust our economic aspects so that we make sure we have the common good and we're not simply feeding them trash. Mindful also of the young people as consumers, as what are they giving to young people. And religious matters need to be entrusted to worthy and experienced hands and carried out with reverence. You can probably think of examples from the media where religion is not handled with reverence. It's not handled with those who are experienced with it. So, for example, let's see. This was from Father Jason's presentation. I forget his source that he gave, but he quoted someone and said, the film industry has veered away from traditional religious themes, but continues to be fascinated by spiritual and supernatural. You can just think of all the TV shows that are all about, ghosts and things like that. But studies have also found that a favorable portrayal of the traditional religious characters and institutions has declined, steadily declined since the Council. Obligations of civil authorities with regard to media: protect and safeguard freedom of information, true and just information, and that's necessary for the welfare of the contemporary society. So freedom of press is an important freedom. Should encourage spiritual values, the culture, the fine arts. but also has to watch to make sure that damage isn't done to public morals, because the welfare of society can be, deeply hurt through that. Especially safeguarding young people with that regard. The second chapter, there's only 2 chapters in this document. Second chapter applies it in or specific cases. So the whole church, all of us within the church, we are called to make effective use of the media, social communications, and use it to spread the faith, apostolic endeavors. Pastors should be linked in with our preaching responsibility. So, in a sense, preaching about its use, but also using them and how we preach and spread the gospel. So, like this presentation eventually will be on YouTube, so other people will be able to see it. The laity, all of you, those who work professionally in the media should endeavor to bear witness to Christ. So, ultimately we want, the mainstream media to have Catholics working in it that will bring the Christian, these Christian concepts into that place to uphold those morals. It encouraged strongly that there be a responsible mainstream press, and then also an authentically Catholic press. So it has to be authentic. I don't know how many of you are familiar with either the National Catholic Register or the National Catholic Reporter. They sound almost exactly the same. I'm not sure what their origins are, but one is authentically Catholic, and the other one often publishes articles questioning or specifically strongly questioning the things that the Church teaches. So one is good and one is not. So one would be authentic and the other not authentic. More wholesome and high-quality films to be produced. So, for example, Father Robert Barron's series on Catholicism, if a number of you see it, that's very top-quality production. But you can probably think of other, maybe movies or Catholic productions that the quality isn't that great. And so it really isn't witnessing to the faith, because someone will see it and say, well, obviously it didn't mean enough to that person when they made it to make it awesome. So the quality of being able to show the beauty of the faith, which, the Catholicism series of Barron's is a very good example of that. Decent radio and television programs should be supported. Those that are out there, unfortunately fewer and fewer. But where it's necessary to set up Catholic stations, TV, radio, we have our Spirit Catholic Radio here. It's quite unbecoming for the Church's children to idly to permit the message of salvation to be thwarted or impeded by the technical delays or expensive, however vast, which are encountered by the very nature of these media. So some of these media may be expensive to use, difficult to get started, but our love of Christ, our desire for the salvation of all should overshadow whatever cost it counts. If you think of the cost that the original apostles gave for the faith, they're willing to die. So are we willing to give resources, time, financially, to be able to bring message to those areas of media that maybe it isn't coming? Conclusion of the document calls for a pastoral instruction to come out that would give further specifics, and that did come out in 1971. And there's been numerous other, as media continues to change and develop. Every year there's a World Day of Communications. So there's been various topics. Like I think this past year's was on social media networks, like online. The year before that, Pope Benedict focused on talking about silence of being an important part of social communication. So the hope of the Council is that media will be like salt and light, will give savor to the earth and brighten the world. So our goal is to make turn media to assist the good of society. It says, whose fate depends more and more on its proper use. Because we can definitely experience how much influence media has, all of its different forms, has on shaping and forming our society. And so its proper use is essential. All right. Questions, comments, thoughts, ideas? Yes.
The movie, The Bible, that was on the History Channel during Lent, apparently it was quite popular.
Yeah.
And now they're talking about the media or the movie producers coming up with more, I don't know, biblical or Christian or whatever.
Yeah.
And my concern is that they will come up with stuff that may not be truly Christian or
Yeah.
there'll be stuff in there that's not quite right.
Yeah, so you see, that's why it's so important that we actually have Catholic people that are in those, even though, there's the difficulty because you come in and you're not going to fit in with the established way things are done. So it's the same way as that, trying to insert Christianity into the pagan world. That's kind of where we are again. That's what the new evangelization is all about. But yeah, that's essential. And unfortunately, I never got to see any of those, but it's in the library. Very good. Because I had a lot of our kids in our school mention that they'd watched parts of it.
Yeah.
So. All right. I've got a few things. What was good? Use of new media to spread the gospel. So you got things like the Pope app and all sorts of other Catholic apps for your phone. EWTN, Vatican YouTube channel. And this is an image from our own blog. And this has got all sorts of great things in it because it's an image for our blog, so we have our parish blog. And then it also mentions about the homilies that are recorded each week. So we have podcasts of our homilies available. Anybody can listen to anywhere in the world. And then it also mentions of how we just set up a Twitter account for the parish. So now you can go to, and I've never used Twitter, so I guess you go using the hashtag GAMD, Go and Make Disciples. You can now tell us, but please don't do it until after Mass is over. We don't want to see a tweet like, Father Vogel's homily is really long today. So, if you're going to tweet about the homilies, wait till after Mass. So anyway, so a lot of good ways in which to spread the gospel and connect. What kind of ways they're mistaken? Well, one thing that I wanted to point out was media acting as a social influence rather than supporting truth. So giving the agenda that they want to give rather than give what actually is. So some specific, case examples like the pro-life march and how much media it receives from the mainstream media. Virtually zero. So that's a distortion of that event. Then you could go back to Pope Benedict, one of his last times that he met with the Roman clergy. He was giving stories about his time at the Second Vatican Council itself. And what he said is there was a virtual council of the media. So there was the true council at Vatican II of the fathers and what they were saying, what they were right. But then there was a virtual council that the media portrayed of what was coming out of the council. And so Pope Benedict says that it was almost a council in and of itself. And the world perceived the council through them, through the media. So dominant, more efficient, this council created many calamities, so many problems, so much misery. In reality, seminaries closed, convents closed, liturgies trivialized, and the true council has struggled to materialize, to be realized. The virtual council was stronger than the real council. But he doesn't end on that negative note. He continues to say that today, 50 years of the council, we see the virtual council breaking down, and that the true council of the fathers is shining forth, which is really a reason why we had this whole series. Then, what I call the virtual Pope Francis. I don't know if any of you experienced this, but so when Pope Francis became elected, the mainstream media immediately jumped upon him and started painting a picture of who this man was. they had specific ideas of who they wanted him to be, and so they began to emphasize those things. To the extent that here's a real large, well, the big thing that came out of it was a lot of them portrayed him pitted him against Pope Benedict, of saying how, in a sense, giving the impression that Pope Benedict was terrible. He was just this awful man, and compared with St. Francis, who's like almost God himself. So for a Catholic, that makes no sense, because every man is going to bring their specific gifts to that role. But the media wants us to think that he's a certain one that's going to support what they like. Well, here's an interesting, in April 25th, an Italian news agency claimed that Pope Francis had appointed a certain man to one of the pontifical councils to find a solution for those who are divorced and remarried to receive communion. But then it had to be released later from the press office of the Holy See that entire story was made up. There was no foundation at all in it. So here is the media just perhaps maybe going off of some kind of, who knows where they got it from. Hopefully they just didn't make it totally from scratch, but maybe from some kind of hearsay or something. I don't know. But it's like giving an impression that this is who this man is. So after a while, it was almost like, okay, I just need to wait like a couple months before I start listening to things again. So after they've calmed down and gone on to other things. So to be aware of that, which I think we are aware, that we take certain mainstream media, with a grain of salt. What kind of things remain to be done for us to transform the media? And I also wanted to bring in this one thing, the importance of silence. Benedict has said that learning to communicate is learning to listen and contemplate as well as speak. So I don't know if you can read the caption there. I wonder why I don't hear from the shepherd anymore. Well, maybe because you're watching TV, computer, you got your music, your radio, all going on at once. It's a reason why you can't hear the shepherd's voice. So that's an important part of media as well. So through this whole course, and so maybe some of you have been able to attend all 8 sessions, maybe some of you have only been at a few. We started all the way back in October, talking about God's divine revelation. We moved upon to contemplate what is the church, and then the specific roles of people within the church, the vocation of you as the laity, the vocation of bishops, priests, and religious. Then we looked at the source and summit of our life, the liturgy, and then from looking at within ourselves, we looked what is our relationship without? What is our relationship with the modern world today? Last time we looked at the part of the modern world that are other Christians, and how do we relate with them? And today we looked finally at these last documents, focused more on not on the world around us, not specifically Christians, but other Christians, the freedom to have religion, or other religions, the freedom to have religion, and the way in which we use media like this to portray the truth. All of this comes from the desire of Pope Benedict, and of course the popes before him, for us to rediscover the faith. That of finding the faith as it's presented through these council documents, that is where we'll find that truth. Benedict wanted us to read them, to read the documents, to read the Catechism. So that's what I've attempted to help you to do, to read them so they wouldn't be as intimidating. And so as we continue on through the year of faith, I invite you to go back. All of those presentations using these new media will all be online as soon as I get the last couple put together and put up on there.